We've covered all the best modern JRPGs in each subgenre, now it's time to go retro. So in this video, I'll be counting down the 10 best retro turn-based JRPGs. And just to clarify, I'm considering anything before the Xbox 360, PS3 generation retro. So anything from the NES up until the PlayStation 2 is fair game. I'll also only be including one game per franchise, or a few franchises in particular would totally dominate the list. What are your favorite retro turn-based JRPGs? Let me know in the comments below. Today's video is brought to you by Rune Factory 3 Special in a collaboration with Xseed and Daredrop. In Rune Factory 3 Special, you bridge the divide of an ancient schism between humans and monsters as a half-human, half-woolly protagonist named Micah. Farm, fight, and fall in love as you revisit a classic in the series that perfected the blend of RPG and life sim genres. Settle down in an idyllic fantasy town as a young adventurer with a monstrous secret in Rune Factory 3 Special, remastered for a new generation. Rune Factory 3 Special is available now on the Nintendo Switch and PC via Steam. You can learn more at the link in the description below. To kick off the list, I wanted to include a Wild Arms game, but I wasn't sure which one. But after I thought about all the different games that I played 1 through 3, the one that I remembered my time most fondly with was definitely 3. And frankly, of the 3 I played, it seemed to have captured that Wild West spirit that everyone seems to love so much the best. Now to me, the series has 2 core tenets that I absolutely love about it. One is its tactical turn-based combat and its ability-based puzzles, and these are incredible and one of the biggest reasons this game is on this list. Each character has a specific skill to kind of explore the environment, like a boomerang, maybe bombs that blow up walls, a grappling hook to grab things like that. And I just remember going through all the different dungeons in Wild Arms 3 and absolutely loving trying to figure out how each ability would work in that dungeon, because there was really only one way to go through it, and that's kind of how my brain works with those types of dungeons, so I just loved it here. However, one thing that I did find annoying was that sort of GPS system where you had to kind of constantly ping the map to find new towns and find dungeons and things like that. It wasn't great, and it certainly got annoying after a while, and it's probably the biggest reason why this game is number 10 on the list. And I also just loved the world and the characters. Like I said at the beginning, it truly felt like a Wild West game. And I just loved Virginia. She had a cool design and personality. Something about those dual revolvers was just so cool. And also I feel like the cel-shaded art style really fits this world so perfectly. The bright colors, the Wild West look, it all just comes together so cohesively. Also, horseback battles, so cool. I'm probably in the minority with this being my favorite in the series, but then again, when have my gaming tastes ever been conventional? A genre that I don't talk about on this channel at all that I really love is survival horror. I just love the tense vibe and atmosphere those games create. And very rarely do JRPGs step into the survival horror realm, but one game that blended both masterfully was Parasite Eve. In the game, you play as Aya Brea, an NYPD police officer. At the very beginning of the game, she witnesses a gruesome attack, and it's up to her to investigate it. Throughout the game, you'll explore New York with different landmarks, as well as the underbelly like in the sewers. I just love the investigation parts where you're just looking for clues and trying to figure out what's going on. All the different slow moments paired with the excellent Yoko Shimomura soundtrack create fantastic tension and suspense that very few games in that era, even Resident Evil, was able to do. It also offers a really unique turn-based combat system. You'll have a meter that builds up and then you'll be able to attack. But while that meter was building up, you could also run around that battle arena freely. And when it was your turn to attack, you could use a variety of guns, from pistols, machine guns, shotguns, and more. And what's cool is you could also upgrade them back at the police station, so there was a lot of variety and freedom to upgrade your character how you wanted in that respect. And this may sound like a bad thing, but I actually enjoyed the fact that it was relatively short, like less than 10 hours. Games these days can be too long, too drawn out, but I feel like with Parasite Eve, it was just the right length. And in my opinion, this is a prime candidate for a full remake. Now, it would probably have to go full Resident Evil to make sure it was modern, and I don't think that battle system would hold up, or it would be kind of weird if it looked photorealistic in a remake. But nonetheless, I think this game and this franchise on a whole deserves much more love. Now again, Xenogears is probably too low for most people, but for me, it just didn't resonate like it did with most people, and I'm not the biggest fan of giant robots. They just don't really do it for me. That all said, I couldn't deny Xenogears' greatness. The story is incredible as it unravels Faye's backstory as you play through the game, as well as the greater plot of the world. It's just fascinating. You'll only get bits and pieces throughout and teases that make you want to keep playing through the game. And man, when those revelations start coming through, it's just mind-blowing. The fact that the second disc is basically just a visual novel and it's still as compelling as it is shows how fantastic that story is. But it also has some really cool turn-based combat. Essentially, you can create your own combos as you input the button button presses in whatever order you want. You can do this not only with the on-foot soldiers, but with the gears as well. And speaking of gears, you can customize them in different ways, so you could kind of build the gear that you want. It also has a pretty neat visual style that some might call HD 2D by today's standards. The characters were 2D sprites in a 3D environment. At the time, it was pretty unique and it still looks fantastic. And speaking of HD 2D, I think that would be a prime candidate for a remake. And of course, I can't forget the incredible soundtrack by Yasunori Mitsuda. It's a great mix of styles, and of course, it has his signature flair that you can just tell every time you listen to it. This is one of the all-time great JRPGs. It definitely deserves a remake and to be fully completed. Now, that might be complicated with most of the original staff at Monolith, now owned by Nintendo, but one can dream, right? Now, the game that truly put Dragon Quest on the map in the West, and unquestionably the game that holds up the best from the retro era, is Dragon Quest VIII. It took the leap to full 3D and was incredible. There was this huge world to explore. You can go in different corners, all these different towns that felt totally lived in, fully articulating characters that could move and their facial movements actually moved. And for the first time, we had voice acting, so you really got a chance to feel what these characters were like. All of this combined meant we didn't have to imagine anymore. This was the Dragon Quest game we always wanted it to be, and it felt like a classic grand adventure. But I think another big reason why people love this game and why I love it was the cast of characters. You have the grumpy yet affable Angus, the pompous Angelo, and the short-tempered sorceress Jessica. And in my opinion, the story only got more fun the larger the party grew. And for me, the presentation really carries this game, which is not a bad thing at all. It has gorgeous visuals that, again, really comes to life now that everything is fully 3D and you can fully realize that Akira Toriyama art style, and the soundtrack was fully orchestrated and it was just beautiful. It truly makes this world feel alive and lived in. Now, some areas are a little too old school for me and really bug me, and it's kind of why it's so low on this list. For one, the turn-based combat system is pretty basic. Each character kind of has an assigned role and you can kind of give some people different leveling up points here and there, but for the most part, people are kind of locked in. There's also a pretty archaic save and resurrection system, and for my taste, it was just a little too grindy. Regardless, it's still an amazing game, one of the best in the entire franchise, and it's an easy recommendation, although I feel like this definitely deserves a nice remaster, not anything like the 3DS Demaster where it almost made the game look worse somehow. A nice 4K 60 frames per second HD remaster would be incredible. Maybe one day. Grandia is a really special game for me. Not only is it incredibly nostalgic, but it's one of the JRPGs responsible for me getting back into the genre after I took a massive break. And I think what I love most about the game is that it feels like a classic adventure. You play as a young kid leaving his home to go on an adventure with his childhood friend. You explore the world for the first time, fall in love, save the world, and so much more. It was also one of the few JRPGs that had voice acting on the PS1. Now, to be honest, it's not that great, but it's not horrible either. There's a certain charm to it that I just like. It also has a really cool combat system that, again, was pretty unique for the time. It was sort of distance-based. It kind of blended typical turn-based combat and strategic RPG combat. And bosses were always a blast because you had to really think about how you were going to attack, how you would position your different characters, and things like that. And also, it was pretty wild how party members just kind of came and went pretty regularly throughout the game. It was pretty unique, but also kind of annoying because you could never truly build your ideal party because every character was never in the party at the same time. And I've been talking a lot about remasters and remakes, and I'm really glad that this game got a remaster on Switch and PC. Now, I don't think it sold particularly well, but at least it had its chance and enough people know about it now. If you haven't played this masterpiece by now, definitely give it a shot. There's so many easy ways to play it by now. And we go from one Game Arts classic to another with Lunar Silver Star Story. Now, when you think of JRPG tropes and stereotypes, this is the game where it all came from. You have kids going on an adventure, collecting MacGuffins across the world, falling in love with your childhood friend with way too many other ones to list. And that's what I love about it. It's just a good old classic JRPG adventure. Now, does it hold up as well? Probably not, but there was nothing quite like this the first time playing through it. It was a really special experience. You had all the tropey characters, but again, this was the game that created said tropes. And much like Grandia, it has a pseudo-distance-based combat system. Now, it's not grid-based, but it's a little bit more basic, but you do have to be within certain proximity to an enemy to do damage to them. And each character kind of had a specified role, whether it be a healer, caster, damage dealer, or whatever it might be. Each party member definitely had a specific role in combat. Again, a little simple, a little basic, but for the time, it really worked. And much like Dragon Quest VIII on this list, I feel like presentation also also does a lot of heavy lifting. The original Saturn/PS1 version was great with its sprites and anime cutscenes, but I feel like the PSP remake is the ideal version of this game. The music was rearranged and everything just looked fantastic. And speaking of the soundtrack, it's great. It's so nostalgic. There's so many classic tunes that every time I listen to just puts me back into that adventure. By today's standards, it doesn't do anything special, but in my opinion, it's a great classic game that epitomizes a classic JRPG. Man, Suikoden 2, what an all-time great JRPG, and I'm so excited that so many new people are going to be able to experience it with the upcoming HD remaster. Now, the Suikoden series is known for its massive roster of characters you collect. You can build up your base and expand it, its compelling stories, and its unique 6-person team-based combat system. And in my opinion, these were all perfected in Suikoden 2, and it picks up 3 years after the first game, and in fact, data can carry over from the first game, and characters from the first game can come to your aid. I think what it does so well is that it has incredible pacing because it has such a huge variety of activities. It has a story that's incredibly compelling. You can recruit all these different characters to build up your base, and that could be a game all on its own where you're just trying to get all the different characters. The combat system on its own is really unique and really fun. You have those massive battles that are kind of basically rock, paper, scissors, but it's kind of cool on its own, as well as a new mini game called Iron Chef. It's kind of this cooking mini game, and all this variety combined was rare for games at the time, so it made this game hold up so well. And the story, oh my god, that opening. It sets the stage right off the bat for an incredible adventure. Now, I would just dive right into it here, but the remaster is coming soon and I don't want to spoil anything for those that haven't played it. I also think the visual style holds up incredibly well, especially compared to other games from that era. Now, that era was full of games that were trying to figure out 3D, yet here we have Suikoden that was just sticking to the 2D pixel art, and it's gorgeous. All the different characters, the way they animate, the backgrounds, it all just looks incredible. The game overall is fantastic. It holds up so well, and I'm so delighted that many people are going to get to play it with this upcoming HD remaster that seems to be doing it right. So if you haven't played it already, man, you're in for a treat. Now, many of you probably expected Chrono Trigger to be number 1, and while it's still incredible, I didn't grow up with it, so it wasn't as revolutionary to me as it was for those that played it back in the day. That said, the fact that I played Chrono Trigger way after the fact, and it's still this high on this list, says a lot about it. Now, why I think so many people hold it in such high regard is because of all the new ground it broke all at the same time. Now, JRPGs at the time had most battles be random encounters, and you would swirl into battle arenas, but here in Chrono Trigger, you could actually see the enemies on the map, and when the battles started, the battles were just right there and the battles were starting, and you didn't have to go to a separate battle arena. Also, the story was pretty non-linear with how you could time travel. Obviously, a big gimmick and a big part of the game is time travel, going to different periods of time, trying to figure things out. But because of that, the story could branch in so many wild ways and provide a number of different endings, which again was pretty unique at the time. And this was also the first game to implement a new Game Plus feature where your stats and everything could carry over to a new playthrough and you were buffed out and stronger the next time you played the game. But I just remember playing this for the first time and being constantly blown away, thinking to myself, this is a Super Nintendo game, I'm not going to be able to do this. But then, wait a minute, you actually can do that, and that's what made it so cool. And of course, this was a dream team of developers, the likes of which we're probably never going to see again in our lifetime. You had Sakaguchi-san, the founder of Final Fantasy, you had Yuji Horii, the father of Dragon Quest, and Akira Toriyama, the creator of Dragon Ball, all working together on this game, and we got a timeless masterpiece. And speaking of masterpieces, we can't forget about Yasunori Mitsuda's awesome soundtrack. There are so many timeless pieces of music that every time I listen to it, I just get chills. It's absolutely incredible. But all that aside, they just nail the basics. It's got a really cool turn-based combat system where it has those team attacks, those tri-attacks, the dual techs, the tri-techs, and it was really cool to mix and match the party to see what kind of combo of attacks you could do. Again, something that was pretty unique at the time. All in all, this is simply an all-time classic that every RPG fan needs to play at least once. It's that good. Now, the game that got me into JRPGs and was my first Final Fantasy was Final Fantasy VII. Now, it may not be quote-unquote the best, but the nostalgia for this game for me is simply too strong for any other entry in the franchise to overtake it. Experience a game with a story full of characters I actually cared about was a new experience for me. I couldn't believe I actually got attached to a game with characters as I really never had before. I can just remember flipping through that manual for the first time and looking at all the different character bios, imagining what they were like and how I would be able to use them in the game. My imagination just ran wild. And this world is just incredible. So many iconic locations and moments, from the futuristic Midgar, the spiritual and serene Cosmo Canyon, the entertainment wonderland that is the Gold Saucer, and so much more. And also that combat system was really fun and customizable, mainly because of the materia system. These were pieces of magic that you could equip to different characters and they would grow and get new abilities, but then you could unequip them and put them on other characters. So no one really had a specific role per se, you could make them whatever you wanted, and building out your party was much more about limit breaks or just whatever character you thought was cool. And also this game had secret characters that you could recruit to your party. Now, this obviously wasn't something new to RPGs, but it was definitely new to me, so I loved that fact. And we can't forget about the ridiculous amount of minigames. Each area seemingly had its own, from the motorcycle fights at Midgar, the March minigame at Junon, the seemingly endless amount at the Gold Saucer, Chocobo breeding, and on and on and on. There was just so much. And of course, that music. So iconic and special, but I don't feel like I truly understood how iconic and special it was until we had those rearranged versions in the remake. Oh my god, just so emotional reliving those moments and seeing the characters brought to life in new ways, accompanied by that incredible music. I don't know if I've ever cried playing a game more than I had with Final Fantasy VII Remake. And I am so incredibly excited for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth to see how they reimagine those classic moments. Definitely my most anticipated game. I think it's going to be a heck of a ride. And for anyone that has followed my channel for a long time, probably no surprise that Persona 4 is number one. It's my all-time favorite game. Well, Golden technically is probably my preferred version, but still, it's Persona 4. Now, this was a game that toppled Final Fantasy VII. That was my previous favorite game of all time, and it held that mantle for well over a decade, and I thought it would never be topped. So to say that means Persona 4 is pretty special. And for me, there's two big reasons why I love Persona 4 so much. The first is the game loop. You can kind of spend your days however you want, and you can set your own pace, which I love. You could either go dungeon crawling until, that's all complete, or you could balance it out with the life sim activities, hanging out with your friends. And not to mention, those activities were really fun. It also brought a fresh spin to turn-based combat for me, where if you hit the enemies with the weaknesses, you could go again and then trigger all-out attacks. It just made it feel very compelling. All in all, I never really got to play an RPG like this before that allowed you to get to know characters this deeply. And that leads to my second reason why I love this game so much, the characters. Still to this day, this is my favorite cast of characters in any video game ever. Throughout the whole story, going through the different fun school activities like the camping trip and the beach trip, I felt like these were real friends that I was getting to know. And at the very end, when you leave on that train to go home, it felt like you were saying goodbye to them. And I don't think I could say that about any cast of characters in any medium at all. Now, it's exciting to see Persona 3 get a remake because that gives me hope that Persona 4 could get a remake. Don't get me wrong, I could still play Persona 4 any day and it'd still be a blast, but the visuals and some of its mechanics are definitely old. It could really benefit from a remake, but if it never does, it'll still be an incredibly special game, and I can't wait for the game that topples it to be my new favorite, because whatever that is gonna have to be incredibly, incredibly special. Now, if you want to hear about the best modern turn-based JRPGs, make sure you check out this video right here. And special thanks to Reset Switch, Tyler Kuzawa, and the Miyazaki Man for supporting me over on Patreon. To get exclusive videos and other cool perks, consider supporting me over on patreon.com/thegaming shelf. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.